Okay, it was in that social environment. A new institution began to show itself, according to Foucault's argument, okay? Especially in those days, facing the problem of dealing with this massive phenomenon of vagabondage, okay? Think about cities whose streets are crowded by some strange people, okay, posing danger, potential danger to the usual city inhabitants, okay, working people. Now, in that time, actually, a new ideology at the same time, especially in those cities, with regard to work, begins to develop, okay. A person's place in the society and its worth, okay, has been increasingly connected with the working capacity of the individual, okay. You know, this shows itself even in the early forms of universal suffrage. We say that, for instance, it was in England we stepped into the world of democracy, as our new political form of organization, okay? With the recognition of the rights of suffrage, you know. But if you follow up the history of the extension of the rights of suffrage, you'll find out that the primary subjects of this right were the well-to-do of the society, okay? So how much land you own turns out to be the criterion whether you should have the right to vote or not, okay? It gradually extended itself now as to cover first the members of the nobility, of course, how much land you own, and they were landlords, but increasingly it began to be measured up by the amount of capital an individual owns, on the other hand, therefore extends itself to those members of the well-to-do of the towns, the bourgeoisie, okay? So actually it is in that connection that work turns out to be an important ingredient of the measurement of one's value, individual's value in society, okay? So your place increasingly began to be determined by the wealth you can control in towns, and this wealth, this idea of wealth, has been connected by the idea or notion of work, okay? So a new ideology with regard to the value of work begins to develop. Now, in older times, there was no place for such an ideology, okay? And, you know, the serf who worked at that time, not the nobility, okay? And worked for the nobility, noble landlord, okay? Now, however, work began to be associated with one's own individuality, so to speak, and turned out to be the measure of one's value in society, okay? Especially in those townships. So it was within the context of this there began to develop, in the face of increasing vagabondage and increasing dangers of the unknown in towns, okay, a new institution begins to show itself. It's called workhouses. And it is in this institution Foucault would find out the seeds of the contemporary prison, not in the dungeons, okay? Dungeons were not part of the penal, or an auxiliary part, only an auxiliary part of the penal system, overall penal system. The real punishment in those days, under the sovereign power, being the torture, okay? Dungeon was the waiting place, and a specific waiting place where no control of the sovereign has been exercised, actually. You put somebody in dungeon, in the darkness of the dungeon, and the whole control ceases at the door of the dungeon, okay? You don't go into the dungeon. As to establish a control over the lives of the inmates. No, you don't care, okay? You put them there just to ensure that they wouldn't escape, okay? Awaiting the real punishments, which was torture there. But here the workhouses had a completely different logic. First of all, they have been based on the ideology, new ideology of work, okay? And on the other hand, they have been devised to put those potentially dangerous elements, okay, flowing outside into the cities, okay, into a kind of enforced work, okay. So these places turn out to be the places of confinement where those potentially dangerous elements, as well as together with those potentially useless elements, including the sick, the madman, and the elderly, and others who are not capable of working, productive, no longer productive, etc., into those places and put them to enforced work, procedures of enforced work, for the benefit of the community, okay? Now, as you can see, these institutions, workhouses, perform two functions, okay? On the one hand, they function as the location, production places where cheap labor has been employed. On the other hand, they function as the places of confinement where dangerous and useless elements put to work, okay? Now this will produce another component for the ideology of work, actually. And this another component will function as to establish that unbreachable connection, modern connection between the body and soul of the individual, okay? Now, within this ideology, within the framework of this ideology, the criminal, the dangerous element, okay, was considered to be the result of a moral corruption, a corruption of the soul, if you like, which can be corrected through work, okay? It was work which was thought to be the basic cure, and laziness was thought to be the basic reason, okay? You know, their acquaintance with danger there was through the experience of the dangers of the vagabond, okay? The vagabond was an unemployed person, having no work to work, no place to work, no place to go to sleep, okay? So it was this context, in this context, when you put them, those people, into work, okay, it was expected that that moral corruption, considered to be the major cause of the danger that these individuals potentially capable of creating as the cure, okay? So this danger is expected to overcome by putting them to work, which has the effect of curing that corruption in their soul, okay? By overcoming that hazardous effects of laziness, so to speak, okay? So that was an interesting piece of component, enabling the modern thinking to establish that connection between that severed worlds of the individual's existence, between one's body and one's soul, okay? So while putting one's body to work, one is expected to cure the corrupted soul, so to speak, okay? And all those potential dangers created by that, you know, that culprit, that criminal person, okay? Actually, a new concept develops in those times, the monster, the dangerous monster, okay? A human being which is capable of committing atrocious crimes, capable of exercising unthinkable cruelty. For instance, there is a very beautiful example Foucault and his friends work on, Pierre Rivière. Okay? Pierre Rivière was a peasant boy. Okay? atrociously killing, murdering, slaughtering actually his own mother, his own sister, and his own brother. Okay, and this, from that modern perspective, a crime committed with utmost atrocity, which cannot be understood by the modern minds, okay, and can only be attributed to that corrupted soul, evil spirit, if you like, of that individual. Okay, that bad seed, that bad evil spirit of that individual needs to be cured. Okay. Now, you know, the reasons for this need to cure are several. You know. First of all, what matters now, as I've said, okay, with regard to the value of the individual is his capacity to work, okay, to produce wealth, if you like, on the one hand. On the other hand, his goodness, again, or badness of soul turns out to be a function of work. Okay, working individual was thought to be increasingly incapable of committing such crimes. Okay, simply because while at the one hand work cures the soul, on the other hand does not give enough time for the individual to think about evil deeds. You know, you are busy, so to speak. Okay, you are busy to produce. Another important factor, of course, the protection of the community, the protection of the established town community against this unknown, dangerous element. Okay? We want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our children from these unknown, strange people. Okay? Strange people, nobody knows what they are capable of doing. Yeah. So all these elements, including the mad, the sick, etc., Foucault would call this the great confinement, actually, to which he already referred in earlier works with regard to the madmen, the lepers, etc., okay, when he was writing that book, Madness and Civilization. Okay. So all these elements falling outside the world of the social relationships interwoven around the concept of work actually began to be, or tried to be, put under control and put to work as well, okay, in these workhouses. Okay, that was the basic institution which would later transform itself into the form of prison, okay, the institution of confinement. And what kind of procedure was taken place? What was the basic mechanism of this institution? Okay, first of all, as Mehmet Ali reminds me quite often, the timetable, the detailed control of the individual's lives in these confinement places. Okay, so timetable referring to that daily schedule, okay, carefully planned, minute by minute, okay, about what these individuals should do in the run of a day. Okay, at 7 o'clock, say, or 6 o'clock, they should wake up. Okay, get up from bed. At 6:15, they should wash their hands, faces, etc. At 6:20, they should sit on breakfast table. At 6:30, they should set to work, etc. Okay. Very careful planning of their daily life. Now, this immediately brings another. The name Foucault gives to this procedure actually is discipline. And he argues that power in this new social constellation, or under this new organization regime of power, actually assumes the form of discipline. Now, we have said there are several intricacies of this argument. First of all, as you can see, this argument defies the idea of a history which has been conceived as something continuous. You know, the usual history of panel system demands from you that you have to draw some evolutionary line from an earlier form of punishment to the new form of punishment. Okay? If you like, in our case here, from torture, or if you like, from dungeon, okay? From torture or dungeon to prison. Okay? And the basic line of this progress from torture to prison being the increasing rationality, you know, the usual result, or increasing humanitarianism, whatever. Okay. However, as you can see, there is what Foucault introduces here in this argument is the very breach. No, torture suddenly disappears within the run of some 50, 80 years. Okay? In the time period of half a century, torture ceases to exist. Okay? No longer such form of punishment. Somewhere else, having no connection with this earlier technologies of punishment, okay, workhouses, somewhere else, assumes new functions, okay, which would develop themselves into being the basic form of modern punishment, the prison. Okay? So there's a breach over there. There's another sense, breach as well. Now, when we are considering the rise and development of the discipline, okay, as the modern form of power, you'll find out that there's no room for it under the operations of the sovereign power. Okay? For instance, the sovereign's punishment were not systematic. The sovereign can only punish all those who can catch, or who he can catch. Okay? And many other culprits, many other people challenging the king's law, running unpunished actually. Okay? That's why actually the sovereign needed his punishment to be atrocious and spectacular. A moment, an event which is worth to remember for everybody. Okay? However, here, what we will see in the modern form as discipline, what we'll see is attention to minute details, careful and persistent exercise of the same. Okay? And the source of this, actually, Foucault finds not in the older technology of punishment, but somewhere else. The monastery. Okay? The religious order and the self-discipline there exercised by the members of the order upon their own selves, okay, as to constitute themselves as the good, faithful believers of whatever God they believe in. Okay? So this self-exercise, actually, in the monasteries, the interesting point is that Foucault was well aware. In the monasteries, monastery is an enclosed place, you know, having minimum connections with the outside world. Actually, it encapsulates those who live in the monasteries and reduces their relationship with the outside world to a minimum, okay, to a necessary level. Okay, so monasteries are encapsulated and enclosed places, and therefore you can easily say that in those medieval times, in pre-modern times, what has been emerged in the monastery as a particular practice is being far from being separated, diffused in the larger society. Okay, you can only find its places of exercise as tiny little islands here and there. Okay? But this simple technology developed there in that limited space of the monasteries, okay, find under these new conditions, find a new space of this exercise and new functions. Okay? Now, we find it in the organization logic of the workhouses. We find it as well in the newly constituting standing armies, first of all. Okay? Now, you know, the army discipline as different from the earlier feudal armies, okay, now these new armies, based upon the usual recruitment processes, okay, that the citizenry would be registered and that the citizenry should have the duty to serve in the army, etc. Okay, but as well, arriving at massive scales requires the internalization of a certain discipline with regard to the members of the army, the soldiers. Okay, the soldiers can no longer act in the ways whatever they like to act. Okay, they are expected to act as a well-organized body. Okay, and this art of war turns out to be increasingly an art of statistics, art of numbers. Okay, how many do constitute a line, for instance? How many soldiers? How many soldiers? How many lines giving you how long firepower? Okay, and they should act in a kind of organized, organic unison, so that while one line is firing against the enemy, the other line occupies themselves to fill up their rifles. Okay, so time is important and actually turns out to be the basic measure for the capacities of an army. Okay, you know, remember 3 rows, for instance, 3 rows of riflemen. Okay, each rifle firing once and taking, say, 12 seconds to refill. Okay, you means that you need at least 3 lines to be able to fire for each 4 minutes, 4 seconds, sorry. Okay, and these 3 lines should act as if they constitute one single body. While one of the rows standing up and firing, the others were sitting, crouching, and filling their rifles, and so on. Okay, this requires, this time limit requires that each and every movement of the soldier needs to be calculated in terms of a certain economy of time and energy. Okay, so this constitution of the modern standing armies therefore represents for Michel Foucault as one of the important examples of this new field for the application of that new form of power, discipline. Okay. It does not stand there, it begins to spread itself towards the constituted, newly constituted, so to speak, modern school system as well. Okay. And as well other institutions. So workhouses were not the only location, only locus for this effect, for the effectivity of this new form of power. Okay, it suddenly, within time space of a half century, actually, it suddenly gets out of that confined space of the monastery and began to spread all over the social space. Okay. And workhouses being its exemplification within the context of the technologies of punishment, penal technologies. Okay. So it was just one aspect. There are as well other aspects, and as we'll see later on, which this culminates in the formulation of a panopticon. Okay. A panopticon, a certain architectural shape specifically designed as to impose and ease these operations of that new power, okay, that disciplinary power. You know, for instance, for this new power, which no longer targets the body of the individual, but as well aims at the individual as the unity of the body and soul, okay, which presents itself within the context of the new ideology of work, you know, new ideology of work. And this power, through its repetitive character, okay, it no longer enforces the individuals, okay, but it forces the individuals to repeat certain activities is to internalize them and turn out to be capable of performing those activities without much thinking about them. Okay? That's the critical point. Okay? Repetitive exercise and a planning, very detailed planning of the activities. Okay? Later on we will see when the Panopticon comes into the picture, the pure form of prison according to Foucault, okay, what has been most emphasized is the control of the lives of the inmates. Okay? You no longer leave the inmate into the darkness of the dungeon. When you leave the inmate into the darkness of the dungeon, you know, the inmates, they're creating their own world, a world which escapes the power of the sovereign. You know, for instance, in Turkish, the Turkish correspondence to this, especially in prison technologies, the koğuş system. Okay? You know, the wards, when they put somebody into a koğuş, okay, they forget about it. And the only way for the power to re-enter into the koğuş, requiring an extra exercise of physical force. Okay? The wards suddenly rushing into the koğuş and beating the inmates and establishing control over there. And however, this turns out to be an occasional something when they especially get information about something which one of the inmates or inmates are hiding inside, etc. Okay? Otherwise, in the most of the time, the usual dynamic of the koğuş system, as you can see, is left to the inmates their own organization. Certain places are reserved for political inmates, certain places are reserved for ordinary criminals, and there both the ordinary criminals and political inmates establishing their own internal order. Okay? And that internal order, which is usually not subject to the outside power. Okay. However, here, in this new technology discipline, this is not possible. Okay? Actually, power penetrates into the very recesses of that confinement places and organizes every second, every moment of those who are subjected to this disciplinary power. Okay? And through this, you know, within the context of that ideology, that new theorizing, new valorization of the work, okay, what we will find out that a development of a technology or adaptation of a certain technology which appears to be specifically designed, almost appears to be specifically designed as to function in the unity, on the unity of the individual as body and soul. Therefore, that power no longer aims at the body alone, okay? And therefore, that power no longer aims at the destruction of the body, okay? It does not need to destroy the body, its target, okay, any longer to be able to show up its efficiency, effectivity, okay? Rather, it measures its effectivity in the effectivity of the transformation it creates, causes in the daily lives of the individuals, okay? All those lazy, useless elements of the society are somehow put to work, put to live in an organized life. Therefore, having no time to devise evil, causing dangers for the others. Okay. This is what the modern discourse understands by rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is the correction of that corruption in one's soul, actually. That corruption which is thought to be causing evil in the activities of the individual. Okay. Why evil? it's evil simply because it is no longer a matter between the individual trying to challenge or breach the law of the sovereign, therefore entering into a kind of personal relationship, personal enmity with the sovereign himself, okay? It was a relationship as if between the resurgent son and the powerful father, okay? Therefore, the father having all the rights and powers to punish that son. You know, that concept, patria potestas, now at those times being only attributed to the person of the sovereign. No, we no longer need such exercise of power, such show of power, simply because what we want is no, or what power aims at, sorry, I correct, we have nothing to do with this. What that power, that new form of power aims at, okay, is no longer to destroy the body, but to put it into useful ways, okay, to produce it, if you like, to reproduce it into useful and usable forms, okay. So, actually, a later discussion with regard to this operation of that disciplinary power would prove itself capable of yielding quite interesting results. Now, this brings me to a rather short discussion of the Foucauldian conception of power, okay? First of all, as I said in an earlier lecture, that usually in sociology we understand power as somebody's ability to make somebody, some other somebody, to accept his will as his will, okay? So A's ability to make B, to accept A's will as B's will, okay? Now, this was our main well-established conceptualization of power, still prevalent, still quite widespread, and actually when you try to apply that Foucauldian conception of power, most of the time you'll find out yourselves working on that old, or if you like, modern conception of power. You know, that the specificity of that modern conception of power is that it is based upon a certain theory of action, okay? First of all, there is the mention of a certain will in connection with a certain subject, as you can see, and that will being the expression of the subject finding itself in the form of power, okay, when that will turns out to be capable of being imposed onto somebody else's will, okay? What's at stake here? A rivalry, kind of rivalry between two subjects crushing their wills against each other. However, Foucauldian conception of power is completely situational, okay? It cannot be directly connected by any idea of subject, but rather to a position or positions in a confrontational situation. Okay. It's exactly situational. Situational means it is practically everywhere. In your own confrontations with your friends, your own confrontations with things even. Okay. These confrontations, but not you, neither things, nor your friends, nor a government, nor somebody else. These confrontations themselves being the generative factor of that power, that new conception of power. Therefore, Foucault would argue that power, in that sense, is not that something can have. You know, our classical definition implies that one person has that power to be exercised on another person. Okay? Here, however, in Foucauldian conception of power, there is no such problem. Okay? It depends upon the situation and the character of confrontation. And by character of confrontation, what we mean? We practically mean that inequality. Remember Nietzsche. That inequality of that quantitative difference, in that quantitative difference, which is understood as that irreducible element there. Okay? So, never can establish, never turn into a equality or a balanced situation. It always is produced out of inequality, okay? And this is that inequality all. Actually defining the terms of that confrontation at the same time, okay? Therefore, Foucault would see power as not something emanating from the higher echelons, higher structure, state, the government, etc., but rather produced through that pores of our social relations. Okay? Therefore, he would call it or describe it as capillary, meaning that it has been produced in the darkest, tiniest, minutest relationships of the society, okay, in the society. There, actually, it's we who produce them, not a certain government, not a certain military organization. Actually, as we will see, the very operation of disciplinary power, when it establishes itself as the widespread form of power, spreading all over the social relationships, the geography of social relationships, we will find out that nobody actually yields that power. Nobody controls that power. And nobody makes or triggers that power to exercise itself. It is there by itself, operating by itself, exercising by itself, and producing new subjectivities by itself. Okay. For instance, okay, that famous example of Panopticon now is awaiting us. You know, Panopticon is, as you may know, is a plan, or an architectural plan of a building specifically designed as to take the ideal form of prison for modern society. Okay. Now, Foucault had been much criticized, but developed by Jeremy Bentham and English statesman and now, Foucault has been much criticized by that simple observation that Panopticon as a project has never been approved and has never been realized. So the building has never been built, so to speak, okay? It remained as a proposal. But what Foucault finds in that proposal, is the development or crystallization of one single ideal form of that disciplinary power. The peculiarity of is this, involving several or interwoven several elements together. Okay? As you know, it has two versions. One is half circle and the other one is full circle. Doesn't make much difference actually. As you may know, the Panopticon is a building designed in a circular shape, composed of two major parts. One building, one circular building outside, and another circular building inside the earlier one. Okay? So if this is our first building, the other one is taking place right at the center of the first one. Okay? There are two basic components. Okay? Now the outer building is designed for the imprisonment of the inmates. Okay? So it has been reserved for the inmates. Okay? The peculiarity of this building was that, okay, these rooms, cells, whatever you call it, reserved for the inmates, have been designed as to have windows, both on their outside facade and inside facade. Okay? So, both here and there, okay, inside and outside, they have windows. And since the source of light is coming from the outside, okay, so it means that light comes from the outer window, passes through the room, and goes out from the inner window. You know, actually, its function being making visible what's going on inside that room. Making visible for whom? for the eye, for the one who's standing at the inside building, at the central building. Okay? So this means that without much effort, the warden can easily observe what all the other inmates allocated to the outer building are doing over there. Okay? Another important function, since the source of light is outside, okay, the inmates are not capable of seeing what's going on in the internal building. Okay? So this means that they are not capable of knowing whether at a given moment they've been watched or not. Okay? Actually, this is a new stage in the development of disciplinary power. Actually, disciplinary power with the development of this Panopticon device arrives at a stage where it no longer needs to be present really to be able to really effective. Okay? So, yani the idea, the very familiar idea, Big Brother, bugün tuvalette de gördüm. Big Brother is watching us, okay, arrives at a new stage here. For you to ensure that you act as if somebody is really watching us, that new power no longer needs that real presence of that somebody, okay? So it means that there may be no big brother at all to ensure you act as if that big brother is always watching you, okay? That's critical. That's a very critical point, which makes this disciplinary power even more effective, simply because it means that it is capable of exercising its influence without really being there. Okay? And as you can see, this enforced requirement for self-disciplining, self-correction of the individual, having quite a serious impact on the constitution of the individual soul as well. Not only bodily activities, but as well its soul. The soul and body now under this regime of power turns out to be inseparable from each other. Okay? Out of this, you can easily arrive at all those theoretical discussions of the control society, surveillance society, etc. Okay? Surveillance enter here in the organization or constitution of disciplinary power as a, so to speak, enhancing factor. Okay? And the peculiarity of surveillance is that, okay, for surveillance to make these operations of that disciplinary power much more effective, it really does not need to be there in actuality, making it quite an efficient form of exercise of power, okay? Economically quite efficient. And remember, returning back to the beginning of our discussion with regard to the modern disciplinary power, it was interwoven around that new ideology of work. Okay? And the whole problematic now, from the perspective of this disciplinary power, is no longer crushed down, is no longer to show how powerful it is. No. Its basic problematic being the increased efficiency of the activities of the individual. And some functionality, some certain functionality, which itself is enough, actually, if you do not say anything more about it, itself enough to establish its connection with the requirements of the developing capitalist society. Okay. We need workers. We no longer need those serfs whose production are no longer needed. Okay. All those world of agriculture were over. Now we are in the cities and we need laborers. And this process corresponds to the production of the laborer from the serf, out of the serf. Okay? And now, returning back to our well-established theories of panel system. You know, as far as we can see today, we have three basic excuses for the maintenance of our penal system. You know, actually penal system means we as society, you know, consciously and intentionally inflict pain on people. Okay? You know, people killing these or those many people, and for doing this, causing a harm, so to speak, and we are causing a further harm. Okay? We are punishing individuals for the crime of killing the girl, daughter, or son of somebody. But those individuals themselves, daughters, sons of somebody else's, and we are punishing them, inflicting a similar pain, okay, you know, according to the principle of the proportionality of the crimes and punishments, inflicting a similar pain, and if that individual caused the destruction of two or three families, we, in addition to this, destroy the lives of 2 or 3 more families in addition to the original harm. So, however, our main justification, one of main justification for the maintenance of those penal systems being prevention. Prevention from crime, you know. Crime here within this context thought to be that activity causing harm. So actually what we aim at is to prevent harm done in the society. Well, so however, our further inflicting of pain, in other words, our further causing pain makes this argument quite weak. Okay? Why we then still do maintain that penal system? Why we take almost kind of pleasure when we see people are punished? Okay, with this question, let's leave it here. Next hour, next time.